Welcome back to the conversation. I am pleased to be joined by none other than Professor Jared A. Ball. He is a professor of communication studies at Morgan State University, and he is the author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. Professor, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. Last time we spoke, we kind of did a deep dive into your book. This time, what I want to do is really kind of talk about the intersection of class and race, which is something that I talk about all the time on my program. But I think it really hits kind of squarely in the nexus of what you wrote about in your most recent book. And really as it pertains to like how they're inseparable, or tell me whether or not you think that those two concepts are inseparable in our fight for liberation. Is one greater than the other, neither, to the detriment of that? What are your thoughts on that intersection?
Well, I think they're absolutely inseparable, and you can't engage in a struggle around one without engaging in a struggle around the other. And to the point about, at least reference to my book, the argument there is that as it relates specifically to Black people, and I would argue this is a universal problem across the board, there has been an encouragement towards a more regressive and narrow form of what we were popularly understand as identity politics, and a walk away from radical political organization, certainly class-based politics, and radical redistributionist politics. So while on the one hand, certainly, and I acknowledge myself often all the time as someone who enters the space through a race-first lens, but understanding that I can't stop there, and that's just based on my personal experience, the entry point for my analysis. But at the same time, I understand that if we don't remain vigilant, and particularly around the issue of class and several others, these issues of identity can be reduced, made more narrow, and in many ways turned into a very, in this case, anti-Black or anti-oppressed group set of politics, if not measured and dealt with vigilantly. So absolutely, we need to focus on both for sure.
I love the way you frame that. You said identity has a role. You enter into the conversation race first, but you're never negligent of the class component. And then you pointed towards how identity then can be reduced and then weaponized. And it's a phrase that we were saying around 2016 very heavily, the weaponization of identity politics. Basically how liberals, they would want to see the top 1% diverse, right? Whatever percentage of Black people in America, let's get our ruling elite that kind of diverse. What kind of games you, like, we could talk about this all day, but just in your work, in your study, in your book, give us examples of how it's weaponized, reduced first, and then weaponized as something that's leveraged against working people.
Well, I'll start with what, in my book, for instance, I start by talking about Jay-Z, a little bit of pop culture and hip hop, and perfectly timed for our conversation, Jay-Z and Pharrell have come back with a new track, Entrepreneur, which on the one hand does just what I was arguing about with Jay-Z's 444 video, or the Story of OJ video rather, that it includes some nominally or surface level, even radical imagery. In this latest Entrepreneur video, you get, a lot of prideful imagery of Black pride, Black strength, Black beauty, all things we need to see, we love to see. But couched in a very conservative politics around pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Certainly don't make any aggressive moves politically or radically in terms of organization or social movement. It's very much about, start your own business, support your own business, and somehow that will lead to betterment for the entire community. And this is exactly the kind of propagated mythology that I argue is throughout my book is prevalent, and which is to say that the struggles, in this case of Black people, are reduced to some pop symbolism, some references to Black entrepreneurialism, some beautiful images of Black bodies on screen, almost to appease people begging for who are starved for that, and of course we are. But then the radicalism is sort of stripped away and reduced to, again, just start your own business, follow the Black capitalist path, and you'll be okay. And this is something that is the way our environment, our political and media environment works to limit the aspirations of people who are looking to struggle for freedom. So if you're, so on the one hand, Black people are saying we want freedom, we want to be equal, we want to be this and that. So there has always been in this country in particular a systemic response that says here's some imagery, here is some symbolism, but we're going to strip it of any sort of substantive radicalism as much as we possibly can, because it's understood from those in power that the pathway to economic equality has never been about entrepreneurialism, starting businesses, supporting or the circulating of the dollar and all that kind of stuff that it's imposed on Black people in particular, as in terms of encouragements and pathways towards liberation. So that's the kind of nuances, the trickery I think we have to work with. And that's why, again, particularly in this month of Black August and commemorating that tradition, we should be reminded of, as Kwame Ture used to say, that Black visibility is not Black power.
You started outlining the different type of radicalism, or the different type of Blackness, not radicalism, but different type of Blackness. There is a certain type of Blackness that is completely palatable to this power structure. Bill Clinton at John Lewis's funeral said as much. He said that we were afraid that for a minute there that the movement was going to go towards Stokely Carmichael, later known as Kwame Ture, and instead it went towards John Lewis. I'm curious how we can translate that type of whitewashing of Black radicalism with the kind of standard quo that is acceptable for white people. Obviously, white radicalism is shunned as well. Socialism in any form is shunned. But I want to draw some parallels there towards like what is being done to the Black community to strip away the radicalism, as opposed to what's consistently done in the white community. And then how can we transcend those?
Well, first of all, memory and imagery and symbolism is political, and there is always a desire among those in power to project their version of the world into the world. So when we talk about white people, we don't hear, we have plenty of monuments and historical memories offered up of plenty of different white people and movements, et cetera, but almost none of them go towards the radical traditions. We don't hear about the white abolitionists. We don't hear about, John Brown doesn't have statues. George Washington has statues. Wendell Phillips doesn't have statues. Abe Lincoln has statues. So when Wendell Phillips said that Lincoln was a first-rate, second-rate man, as someone who was a fake abolitionist and didn't care about Black people, he's erased from history. The labor unions, the anarchists, the socialists, all the communists, all of those histories are erased. I mean, specifically, even the Pledge of Allegiance that school children in this country are encouraged to say every day was intentionally reframed or repurposed with the phrase "In God We Trust," specifically as an anti-communist move. So when there is a veneration of John Lewis, the first thing that Black people, I think, that we have to do is always be careful and say, first of all, we're not going to allow anybody to play games with us and separate us and tell us who we should and should not like. Absolutely. But we will at the same time be nuanced and sophisticated enough to understand that John Lewis was preferenced because his politics were more palatable, as you said, less overtly radical, and more along the lines of working within the two-party, American electoral political process, whereas we all know Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, was about, as he said himself, destroying that process and recreating an entirely new country, that had never existed. So, of course, Bill Clinton and those of his politics would want to promote John Lewis. And John Lewis, in his own memoirs, talked about being the head of SNCC and going all throughout Africa and being told that if he was anywhere right to the politics of Malcolm X, that African leadership then at that time in 1964 wasn't going to want to deal with him. So he even understood then that he was being pitted against different kinds of more radical politics, Black politics, even in his lifetime on the world stage. So again, we just have to be more vigilant and careful not to let people divide us and play us against one another. At the same time, being careful to understand why certain politics and traditions are venerated over others.
We have a few minutes left here, but I would like to talk a little bit more about your book in context of why this book will matter to non-Black people, because I've read it and it is very significant and it really hits home to me. But I want more people to read it because I think the message translates far beyond Black communities.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, certainly that's true. I focus on Black people, but through that lens, I think people can use the book for a number of different reasons. One, it can help, I think, better assess the economic and media apparatuses in this country. I think, and also I think advocates by the book's end a more radical, universal political advocacy plan, so to speak, that I think we should all be focused on, which is namely the redistribution of the gross domestic product of the country, at least before this crisis, the $20 trillion that we all help generate, whether we shop, save, spend, whatever we're doing, we're contributing to that money, yet it's redistributed to that top 1% by public policy. And I think that all of us, through an understanding of how propaganda is used in this country, how media and economics are discussed in this country, and journalism, even in the context of Black America, all people can understand a little bit more about what's going on as it relates to their specific experiences, and offers up an idea, I think, that we don't follow up on enough of, for addressing ourselves to public political policy that redistributes the wealth for all of us, to reduce some of the internecine fights that we have interracially.
Jared, it's always a pleasure. It is always a pleasure to have these conversations with you. Definitely want to have you on again as soon as possible. Professor Jared A. Ball, he's a professor of communication studies at Morgan State University. His book is The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. How can they get up with you really quickly?
imixwhatilike.org. The publisher has made the book available for free in response to Black Lives Matter. So people can go on I Mix What I Like, click the link there, get the book for free, and see many of the other things that we're doing there. And I greatly appreciate the work that you're doing and the time you've given me here on this program.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us.
Anytime.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.